Okay, while people are still coming, let's start. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's masterclass. Before giving the floor to Miriam Colls, I would like to say a few words about why this topic is so relevant for our work. My name is Ayşe Gülçil. I'm from WWF Netherlands. I'm the project manager of Dam and River Barrier Removal Southeast Europe project, funded by Open Rivers Program. Through this project, we are working to build momentum for river barrier removal across the region by supporting partners, identifying removal opportunities, sharing knowledge, and strengthening a growing network of practitioners and organizations. Dam removal, as you know, is often seen mainly as a river restoration measure, but today's presentation invites us to look into a little broader perspective as a part of nature-based solutions. Removing the barriers can help restore river connectivity, improve habitats, support biodiversity, increase climate resilience, and bring rivers back to life for people and nature. We are very pleased to have Miriam Colls today to guide us through this perspective and help us connect the dam removal with the wider nature-based solutions agenda. A little bit of introduction to Miriam. She is a researcher at the University of the Basque Country. Her research focuses on freshwater ecosystem, particularly ecosystem function and restoration. Today, she will discuss how barrier removal can be understood as a nature-based solution, highlighting its role in restoring river processes while delivering ecological, social, and climate benefits. Miriam, thank you very much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thanks.
And just a brief information that we have 20 minutes presentations, and after that, we are welcoming your questions and answers.
Thanks. I'm sharing the screen now. Okay. Well, good afternoon to everybody, and thanks to be here. As was mentioned, my name is Miriam Colls from the University of the Basque Country, and today I'm here to talk about barrier removal as a nature-based solution. Usually, when we think about environmental restoration or nature-based solutions, we imagine by adding something back to nature. For instance, planting trees, constructing wetlands, or restoring floodplains. But sometimes restoration starts differently. Sometimes restoration starts by removing something. So today I want to explore a simple question. What does barrier removal really imply? Worldwide, thousands of rivers are fragmented by barriers. Some of these barriers are functionally, others not, but all of them shape river ecosystems every single day. River fragmentation, it is the presence of a barrier within the main course of river ecosystems that disrupt the longitudinal connectivity of the ecosystem, is not an isolated problem. Just across Europe, more than 1 million of barriers fragment river networks. But usually, when we talk about river fragmentation and barriers, we imagine large dams, but in many rivers, the most common barriers are much more smaller. I'm talking about dams, culverts, or weirs that individually seems insignificant, but collectively they account for almost the 90% of river barriers. Some of these obstacles obviously still provide services, such as energy production, flood regulation, or water supply. But many others are obsolete, barriers that no longer provide any function or service, but still alter river processes and ecosystem connectivity, which means that removal is not just an ecological decision. It often involves trade-offs between different societal priorities. Because both currently active and obsolete barriers interrupt much more than water flow. Sediments that should be naturally transported downstream become accumulated upstream. Additionally, in these stagnant areas, the basal water level also increases as a consequence of the presence of the barrier. Barriers also disconnect habitats and isolate communities. Fish migration is probably the best known case, but many aquatic organisms, such as macroinvertebrates, are also affected. At the same time, small barriers as a consequence of this increase of the basal water level, especially upstream, and that they don't have this regulatory capacity, increase the flood risk. Additionally, in stagnant reaches, water velocity decrease, which promotes the accumulation of organic matter and fine sediment. As these materials accumulate, oxygen dynamic change, and sediment progressively become more anaerobic. These altered conditions modify several biogeochemical processes within the system. The accumulation of organic matter, together with these lower oxygen conditions, create the optimal conditions for methane production. And this is important because, as you will know, methane is a particularly powerful greenhouse gas. Large dams are already recognized as important methane sources, but small barriers are far more abundant, as we see before. So the question becomes, do these small structures also influence greenhouse gas emissions? Recent evidence suggests that they do. Here we have the total fluxes of methane, CO2, N2O, and CO2 equivalent. Is a sampling campaign that we perform in more than 10 barriers, and we measure the emissions in free-flowing sections and in barrier-impacted sections. And what we observe is that methane concentration increased dramatically in impounded sections. But more importantly, most of this methane is not emitted from the water to the atmosphere in the stagnant areas. It is emitted in the waterfall as a consequence of the turbulence in the waterfall in this area. So up to now, we have seen that barriers alter river ecosystems in many different ways. But removing barriers is only the beginning of the restoration process, because rivers are complex systems. Sediments have accumulated for decades. Species have adapted to fragmentation. Hydrology have been altered for generations. So when rivers actually recover after the removal, recent evidence shows that the ecological distribution of barrier removal from impact reaches tend to converge toward reference conditions. Here, what we have is the post-removal effect size, the difference between impact and control reaches. In blue, the formerly impounded reaches. In red, the downstream reaches. And the zero represent the control conditions. What we observe is that recovery is a gradual process rather than an immediate process. As time passes after barrier removal, ecological conditions become increasingly similar to those found in controlled reaches or in undisturbed reaches. This trend is observed both upstream in formerly impounded reaches and downstream, although the convergence tends to be faster in formerly impounded reaches. And this suggests that removing barriers initiates a gradual ecological recovery process that continues over multiple years. So recovery is not an immediate process. Ecological conditions tend to improve progressively as river processes and communities reorganize after the restoration. Thus, we must remember that rivers recover throughout trajectories. Initial disturbances coexist with long-term ecological benefits. Sediments move, food webs reorganize, biogeochemical processes shift, connectivity returns gradually. Restoration is not a moment. It is a process unfolding throughout time. But up to this point, I have mainly focused on the ecological dimension of barriers and barrier removal. But rivers are not only ecological systems. They are also embedded within landscapes, cities, economies, and local communities. Many barriers were originally constructed for water supply, flood control, etc. And over time, they often become a part of local identities. So decisions about remove barriers are not only based on ecological arguments, since they also involve governance, economic, social values, stakeholder interests. This means that restoration is not only an ecological challenge, it is also a social and political process. And this is why barrier removal can be implemented as a nature-based solution, because the key characteristic of nature-based solutions is that they do not solve a single problem. They work by restoring natural processes, which in turn generate multiple co-benefits simultaneously. Nature-based solutions connect ecology, society, and economy. Barrier removal is therefore not only about ecology. Restoring natural functioning of rivers it's also about creating social and economical benefits that interact continuously throughout the restoration process. And this is exactly where restoration decisions involve key economic sectors and social systems, for example, the hydropower or insurance sector. To me, one of the clear examples of these trade-offs is the hydropower. Hydropower contributes to renewable energy production, decarbonization, and energy security. But at the same time, barriers remain one of the major drivers of river fragmentation worldwide. Therefore, river restoration is not simply a choice between energy production or ecological restoration. The challenge is understanding how to balance both objectives. And this highlights an important principle. Not all barriers provide the same ecological or societal values. Some infrastructures remain strategically important, while others generate substantial ecologic impacts, but provide limited societal benefits. Hydropower thus illustrates why river restoration is rarely black or white. Some barriers are essential for energy security, essential to mitigate climate change impact, while others produce very little electricity but still generate substantial ecological impacts. The challenge is therefore deciding whether hydropower is not deciding whether hydropower is good or bad. The challenge is identify whether ecological restoration provides greatest social benefits than maintaining these barriers. On the other hand, climate change is forcing a reevaluation of how rivers are managed. Extreme events are becoming, as you well know, more frequent and more costly. While infrastructures-based approaches increasingly show their limitations, traditionally, flood management was based on building increasingly large infrastructures. But today, many countries are also exploring how river restoration and restoring floodplains and reconnecting rivers can reduce flood peaks naturally. Consequently, river restoration and barrier removal is increasingly being considered as a strategy not only for biodiversity conservation and maintenance, but also for flood risk reduction and climate adaptation. Flood risk assessment and return periods analysis have demonstrated that restoring river connectivity and natural processes can contribute to territorial resilience. As a result, restoration is increasingly viewed not only as an environmental intervention, but also as an investment in long-term risk reduction, climate adaptation, and social resilience. So, barrier removal exemplifies the principles of nature-based solutions because it restores natural processes while simultaneously generate multiple benefits. It contributes to biodiversity conservation, of course, but also to climate change adaptation and mitigation, risk reduction, and social well-being. At the same time, it requires governance, stakeholder engagement, and the integration of multiple objectives. In this sense, barrier removal is not just an ecological restoration or intervention. It is also a systemic approach to restoring the relationship between rivers, ecosystems, and the societies. So, if there is one central message of this talk, is that barrier removal is much more than removing infrastructures, than this engineering action. Restoring rivers may involve removing barriers, but recovery will follow throughout ecological, social, and governance trajectories that develop over time. And this is why barrier removal can be understood as a nature-based solution, because it restores natural processes while simultaneously generate benefits for biodiversity, climate adaptation, risk reduction, societies. Ultimately, barrier removal is not only about reconnecting rivers, it is also about reconnecting ecosystems, people, and the way societies choose to coexist with rivers in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Miriam. Great to hear. And we already got some questions in the chat. I would like to ask our participants to ask one question by raising the hand, please. And if you have more than one question, then you can write in the chat. If we have time, we deal with the second question as well. For now, in the chat, we have Katarina. I'm going to read out that question, Miriam, for you. Is this the case for all barriers, but for just a few? For the emission, for example, is more likely in larger dams than in small weirs?
Yeah, I mean, there are just few studies working with small barriers or analyzing the greenhouse gas emissions in small barriers. In the case of large dams, yes, there are a lot of studies that are showing how these stagnant areas, especially the methane in the water, the dissolved methane, increase a lot. But regarding small barriers, I think that there are just two studies. This one where we are working now, that we analyze the methane emissions from these small barriers at basin scale. We include 15 barriers, more or less between 10 and 15. And now we are finishing the analysis, and we observe how these methane emissions are related with nutrients. Obviously, if there are more organic matter inputs, the decomposition, or there are more organic matter to decompose under anoxic conditions, and consequently, at the end of the day, more greenhouse gas emissions, more methane emissions.
Okay. Katerina, I can't really see you, but would you like to ask your second question in public?
Yeah, definitely. I'm here. I don't know if you can see me now, but just
Yes,
thank you for the
perfect.
presentation. So, Miriam, you showed this graphic with the post-removal effect size, but I didn't quite understand what you mean. What was the effect
Yeah,
It's the
this
size of
for
what
removal
that's
effect
showing.
size is the difference between the control and the impact. The impact, they are the reaches impacted by the presence of the barrier, but after removal. It is
It's the what impacted by the removal? I didn't understand.
the areas impacted
Okay.
by the barrier, but after the removal, it is the stagnant area and also the downstream area just after the barrier, but where the hydrology was altered, previously altered as a consequence of the barrier.
Okay, thank you.
So it's the difference between these impact reaches and the control reaches. For this reason, that if it's not zero, means that or the control is better than the impact, or than the impact is better or have higher values than the
Okay,
control.
I understood that you were comparing before and after, but I didn't understand exactly what you were measuring. So that's why the
No,
question. Thank you.
it's a meta-analysis that we are is under the review now, where we compare a lot of different metrics. And this is the result of a lot of different metrics, all of them.
So it's like a compounded index.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
an
okay.
index.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Katerina. For the next question, anyone would like to take the floor for the questions? Some people just joined, but the presentation is finished, so we will share the recording and for you guys that you can see later on. And also, I will share the presentation as well with all of you who participated today and also couldn't participate today. So we will share the recording as well. Any other questions to Miriam? Maybe Miriam, if Katerina, you have one more question. You are the only one
Yeah,
asking
sorry.
questions.
Sorry, I'm quite enthusiastic about the topic. Yeah, I have one question because this is something that.
Oh, sorry,
Um,
Katerina. Can you
Can
maybe
you hear me?
introduce yourself as well?
Oh, yeah,
Just to introduce a little
definitely.
bit
So,
who you are.
okay, so I'm from WWF Portugal. I'm
Okay.
Conservation and Policy Director here in Lisbon. My question concerns the narrative around obsolete barriers, because in your presentation, Miriam, you mentioned not just the obsolete, but those that are also unnecessary. And this is a very tricky and slippery slope in terms of discussions. So there's, I mean, even when we talk about obsolete barriers, we can either categorize them as such in relation to their original purpose or to any purpose. And so this is also contentious. If we mean obsolete because they no longer fulfill their original function, or because they don't fulfill any function at all. And what do you mean by unnecessary? Because that's I'm sure there's not a clear-cut answer for all of this, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you.
I think that is a really difficult question. I mean, because the term obsolete means a lot of things, depending if we are thinking on energy. And for instance, in the case of energy, maybe today is obsolete, but in few years, the technology is improved and is not obsolete in 10 years. So it's something tricky. But I think that there are a lot of barriers. There are a lot of barriers that today are just in the middle of stream ecosystems without any use. And we have to do a cost-benefit analysis. It's clear that they are impacting the biodiversity, that now we are starting to observe that they are also increasing the greenhouse gas emissions, that they are increasing flood risks. So we are talking about a lot of arguments to remove that barriers. And we have to decide, obviously, which ones we want to maintain. For instance, I'm not saying we have to remove all the barriers of the world. Obviously, if some barriers provide water supply for a lot of population, I can understand why we have to maintain that barriers. But in those cases where a barrier is close to areas with a lot that provide a lot of organic matter, so this barrier is emitting a lot of greenhouse gases. The flux of greenhouse gas is really high. Is in urban areas where the flood risk increase or the risk is worse. I think that is a barrier that we have to remove. So what is obsolete? Obsolete means without any use. What is any use? Any use today? Maintain something just to maintain, just in case. I think that is not a reason to maintain when we are talking about all these things. For instance, in the Mediterranean region, few years ago, I don't know if 2 years ago, the Dana was worse in some regions because of the presence of these small barriers that increase the flood risk. So I think that in this case, in that areas, we have to remove that barriers. But yeah, the prioritization of barrier removal is a challenge, especially because we have to work. I mean, I'm ecologist, so we have to work together with the hydropower sector, the economic sector, the society. And I think that this is the challenge of organizations like barrier removal or the WWF to fix how to manage.
Wow. Thank you very much, Miriam, for elaboration. I see Anna Schöfer.
Hi.
Please. Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. I want to share some experiences. I'm from the Austrian Biologist Association, and in Austria we have a very mountainous region and lots of barriers for flood control, so to speak. So on the one hand, we have the problem that lots of municipalities they own the barriers. For example, in a steep stream region, and all the sediments accumulate, and they don't have the money to remove the sediments behind the barriers. So they always have to ask the government to give more money, and so I would think the removal of these barriers would be a great asset, because then you don't have the maintenance costs. But of course, we then have to look how can we manage to have the barrier removed and no flood risk downstream. So we have to widen the river, give the river more space. And often we also have the problem that if you want to remove a barrier, for example, a barrier that was constructed in order to mitigate the erosive power of the stream, so to speak, to kind of slow down the velocity and the erosive capacity, then they don't just remove the barrier and give the river more space, but they build technical structures like ramps, and these are very costly, high costs. So all the money is spent on a few ramps, so to speak. So I guess there has to be also a different approach on kind of if there's no critical infrastructure, we have to live with the river just doing its thing a bit, or there still is approach of kind of we want to control the river. So I wonder if you also have similar experiences from mountain regions in Europe. And also one question: do you know where's the biggest progress right now in barrier removal in Europe? And also one more question: do you think now with the restoration law and the free-flowing rivers that this will drive a new wave of barrier removals? Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I will try to remember all the questions. Okay, the first one that is about these mountain regions where I'm working in the Basque Country, and here it's a mountain region where we also have problems with the slope of the region, because the vales are like that. But one positive thing of these regions is that the recovery is really fast. I mean, even more faster than in more flat regions. That is true at the same time that throughout years we construct the cities and the villages just up stream, no? And in that case, this is really difficult to know how to manage the removal of these structures and the protection of the cities or the village. So yeah, in that case, I don't know what to do, because sometimes it's impossible to remove the structure. I like a lot the definition, because we are talking today, or I mainly focus on barriers and weirs, but I use the term barrier because one thing is a dam, that I think that it is important to clarify that. One thing is a dam, that is a large barrier, no, a really big barrier. Another thing are the small barriers. When we are talking about the small barriers, we are also talking about bridge, ramps, culverts, and weirs. Today, I focus on the effects of these weirs, no, on the ecosystem, but I like a lot to use barriers to include a lot of different structures that are within a stream. And in that sense, Carlos Garcia de Leanit have an article where classify all these barriers and the different types of barriers. And I think that it's really cool and important to use correctly the different terms that you did it. So because of that, I this come to my mind. And the other questions were, sorry.
Yeah, a long line of questions. I think if you can point out which areas in Europe have the biggest progress, I think there's a lot of action, I guess, in the Baltics, but I'm not sure if I'm rightly informed. And also with the EU restoration law, if you think that this could drive the barrier removal and dam removal activities in Europe.
Yeah, obviously, I think that with nature restoration law, or I hope, I don't know if I hope that the nature restoration law help us to remove more barriers, and also to provide more arguments to remove that barriers, because I think that it's really important not to have just one argument, to have a different types of arguments, because sometimes the ecological argument and the protection of the biodiversity is not enough, and for some people this is not enough. So yeah, I think that will provide us more arguments and more possibilities to remove. And finally, about the countries. Well, I don't know, but before this presentation, I was checking the Barrier Removal Europe website, and there in the north of Spain, there are a lot of barriers that are removed or that were removed in the recent years. In the Baltic area, I know that there are a lot of programs, but I'm not sure if are programs or barriers that are already removed. And also in France, I think in France, I think that they are so active with that. I think that probably in the next years we will have, or we will see, a lot of barriers, a lot of removed barriers in those areas where climate change impacts will be higher or worse because of climate change, obviously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Anybody has questions? I see in the chat some.
There's a question in the chat.
George. Huh? That one. Yes. George, would you like to ask your question, or do you want me to read out? I guess I will read out if you put it in the chat. Which is the amount of CO2 or NH4 emissions gained from barrier removal? For example, removal of a medium dam.
It depends on the barrier, because especially depends on the inputs of organic matter. Because this CO2 or methane is generated because of the composition of organic matter, and the anoxic conditions is methane, and the oxic conditions or more oxic conditions, more presence of oxygen, CO2. But it depends on the type of barrier, the residence time, but for sure, on the inputs of organic matter and nutrients.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, yeah. Arna is asking, can you read this question? Okay. Many dam removal projects seem to focus heavily on stakeholder engagement before and during implementation. What are your experiences with stakeholder engagement after removal? Do you actively involve stakeholders in monitoring and communicating the outcomes? And does this help maintain or strengthen public support for future restoration projects?
I've been involved in Berlin project that was an Horizon 2020 project that finished a few months ago. And there, my case study was in charge of remove barriers. And obviously within Berlin, we not just remove barriers, we also focus on stakeholder engagement and public participation. So yes, I did it. And during the last 4.5 years was difficult. I mean, because in some cases the social acceptance was really good, but in some cases not, especially because the cultural heritage of the barriers, and I'm not talking just about the administrative, cultural heritage or cultural value of these barriers, also the value that have for the people, the value that the people is providing to these barriers, and it's really difficult to say to the people that, okay, this barrier was there for centuries in the middle of, for a lot of years, in the middle of your village, but now the best thing that we can do is to remove it. It's difficult, and sometimes it's really difficult to convince, and some people it's impossible to convince. But I think that even in that cases, or at least based on my experience, the most important thing is the municipal support, because municipalities and local authorities can do a lot to promote to promote the discussion about barrier removal, to start this barrier removal movement. And in my case, or based on my experience, this was really cool, because we were working a lot in some village with barrier removal, and discussing a lot about barrier removal. And once we receive a message from another municipality saying, okay, we have one of these barriers and we want to remove it. What do we have to do? So I think that it's about to promote these discussions, these public discussions, and one day we will arrive.
So it's a challenging subject, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I was going to ask the same question, so I'm glad that someone asked. We have, first I'm going to get Shelley Forrester, raise the hand, and then I will read out the rest of the questions. Shelley?
Yes, hi,
Hi.
good afternoon, everyone. I actually just did type my question into the chat in case it's easier, but I'm representing Aqua, Water Heritage, where we have a big project pipeline, let's say, of historic water mills, where one of which could be converted and for community scale hydropower in some cases, sometimes using aquathermal technology, which is maybe a little bit easier to address the barrier question. But I'd be interested to hear you elaborate a bit more on what you see as the complex trade-offs in the barrier removal cost-benefit analysis or otherwise, where you said, yes, this is a tough one, because indeed we all know that there can be increasing maybe benefits to having this community scale hydropower. And in the case of these historic water mills, the ecosystem has been changed for sometimes hundreds of years. So how do we, what are the factors that we should take into consideration when we're looking at that complex trade-off? And can you give any sort of suggestions how we might do it that actually creates a better win-win scenarios for those that are adamant that barriers must be removed?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I mean, we are talking again about removal strategies, no, in some way. And yeah, in the case of hydropower, I think that is really complex because, especially because usually hydropowers are big companies, and this is the first thing that is worse, that is hard. And second, because obviously the some barriers produce or provide big benefits like water supply or energy. I think, however, that we have to consider, as I mentioned before, the impacts of not just the barriers that are producing this energy, but also of all the barriers. And maybe if you are the owner of one hydropower plant and you have a big barrier, we are not talking about to maintain that barrier, but maybe you have to promote and to pay to remove other barriers. Maybe your impact is not removed, but you are contributing to reduce these greenhouse gas emissions, to improve the biodiversity, blah, 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 because sometimes in one area we have different barriers. So maybe you can contribute, or the owner of a barrier can contribute to this barrier removal movement, removing other barriers. Not just, I mean, there are much more barriers. So yeah, I think that this is one of the possibilities. But again, I think that here we have to arrive to a common point between ecologists, society, and the economic sectors, and to see how to manage. But obviously, or what is clear to me is that we have a problem that we have to solve. To me, was, or based on my experience, was really useful the support that provide to us the insurance sector, because the insurance sector was analyzing this cost risk throughout an economic perspective, but yeah, considering these risks of maintaining also the risks for the society, for the people that is living close to these areas, the risks that supposed maintain that barriers. To me, work with this insurance sector was really good. So maybe more, we have to analyze the barriers more under that perspective, this economic perspective, because at the end of the day, as an ecologist, I can provide a lot of just ecologic arguments, this increase of CO2 emissions, the impact on biodiversity. But as I mentioned before, we need a lot of different types of arguments. And I think that the economic one is obviously an important one.
Okay.
Yes, I think so too. I mean, in my case, the project pipeline we're talking about are small, community-based. We're not talking large corporate. And so there's not often a multiplicity of barriers involved. It would only be one or two. And personally, I think one of the technologies that's becoming most interesting here is the idea of using aquathermal, which doesn't necessarily need a barrier to have the flow of water sufficient for the production, because you're using then the heat exchanger and heat pump technology as well, and in retrofitting these water mills. But we're, from the perspective of energy security and energy independence, I think on a community scale, I think these things are quite interesting to look at vis-a-vis barrier removal per se, and also when I look at what you have to think about in terms of the ecosystem revival and restoration, and that, I guess there can be arguments that if these barriers have been in place for sometimes hundreds of years, you are dealing with an ecosystem that has evolved, and does it not have its own value at this moment? So I'm kind of curious, as you say, you're an ecologist. So from an ecological or an ecologist point of view, what do you think of that kind of, how do you look at that? You have an ecosystem that's been changed, evolved over, let's say, 200 years. Does that, and now it's got its own ecosystem that's a bit different. So
I mean, I think that we are not talking about just about the ecosystem where we have the barrier, since, as I show, we are starting to see how that barriers are also increasing the greenhouse or promoting the greenhouse gas emissions. So we are talking about the ecosystems of all the planet. So I think that, or at least to me, this is a key argument on an ecological perspective, because we are talking about climate change. At the same time, I think that it's really important to remember that sometimes when we are talking about barriers that are in the stream, there are no maintenance on that barriers. Nobody is maintaining the structure. And it's really important to maintain that structures, and it's impossible to maintain all the structures that are currently in the rivers. So if the owner cannot maintain the structure, to me, is a reason to remove it, because you are increasing the risk, the risk of an accident, if you are not able to maintain that barrier. So to me, these two arguments are key. One is the security. For this reason, to me, the insurance sector is key. And the other one is that we are not talking just about biodiversity. We are also talking about the future. Yeah, it's true that obviously the communities, after a lot of centuries with that barrier in the stream, are adapted to the presence of the barrier. But we are also talking about the climate change, about the ecosystems in the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Shelley and Miriam. We have two more questions and then one in the chat. So I'm going to read out the chat first, and then I will give the floor to Clara and Richard. Just quickly, because we have last 10 minutes, Miriam. The question is from Kersan de Blanchard. Well, if I'm incorrectly reading, sorry. Based on your experience, what are the best practices for managing sediments in case of weirs removal?
Yeah, it depends a lot about the type of the river. As I mentioned before, in barriers that are in mountain areas where the flow velocity is really fast and the flood peaks are really high and the river is really dynamic, I think that the best thing to do is nothing, because it's really easy to clean, to say something, these sediments, or to remove these sediments with the water, because the river is dynamic. In other cases, sometimes we have to help the river. But the most important thing, obviously, before to remove the barrier is to analyze the sediments to know if there are some pollutants within the sediment. But depend a lot on the type of rivers that we have.
Okay, thank you so much. And Clara.
Hi. Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to ask, when you talked about the impacts to climate change, that there are the releases of the greenhouse gases from the upper part, and when you remove the barrier, it's done. So how big is this? Or I have the feeling that some people might argument that if you compare it to industry emissions or traffic emissions or whatever, is it comparable, or is it just very small amount of emissions that are caused by these barriers?
Yeah, it's true that it is not comparable, of course, with a car. I mean, we are talking about less emissions. spike depend on the inputs of organic matter, as I mentioned before. But the point is that we are not talking about one barrier. We are talking about more than 1 million of barriers just in Europe without any use. So we have something that is releasing methane to the atmosphere without any argument. I think that this is the argument. The argument is not if a car is contributing more or less to the climate change. Is that it's something that we can avoid. I
And
mean,
just do we have some numbers, like we can say, like removing 1,000 barriers equals, I don't know, one plane going from London to New York or something like that, that people can imagine what is the amount that we are talking about? Or...
No, because it's something that we are starting to see now. I mean, as I mentioned before, it's something that just some studies now are starting to see and to detect, especially from small barriers, because there are some articles and a lot of articles that are working with or that worked before with large dams. But in the case of small barriers, we know just few things about that. We know that it depends on nutrient inputs, on the type of river that we have, type of sediment, but not too much. We need more time to study that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Clara. Now in my list, Richard. Richard, can you ask your question, please?
Hello.
Hi.
I have one question. WWF Poland. We have a very big problem now in Poland with that our government is promoting new SHPs to local authorities that they can build ones with EU money funds, for example, modernization fund, on obsolete barriers, those barriers that we would like to remove. And usually they are very small, potential of hydropower is very low. In Poland, all hydro potential to produce electricity is very, very low. We could just switch off our all hydropower plants and nothing will happen to safety of our electricity maintenance in Poland. So I have a question that do you have some problems like this, that there are new SHPs on barriers that you want to remove, or new ideas? Thanks for RED III directive that every even smallest one SHP is like overriding public interest. I think it's a very big problem in Poland now.
Yeah.
Do you have it in your country, or you know how to avoid it?
No, I don't know how to avoid it, and I have no experience on that. But talking about with the hydropower sector, one of the main problems, and this was the first question of that meeting, one of the main problems that we had was the definition of obsolete. And I think that to solve that problem that you are commenting now, but that is a common problem, we have to define what is obsolete. We have to define when we can remove a barrier and when not. And the obsolete maybe also include just produce energy, but just a small amount. But we have to decide. And I think that at the end, one day we have to arrive to a political decision about which barriers we have to maintain and which not. Otherwise, it's impossible.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. So we have Arthur with a question.
Hello.
Hey.
I see I'll be maybe last one. Also from Poland, from Foundation Rewilding Pomerania. I'd like to come back with one question from Poland. Poland is a strange country. I see another challenge to solve. It is that many of barriers in our country were built on the strongly channelized, straightened and deepened rivers, and in many cases we are not able to remove full barrier. The down part is keeping the right water level in ground, so full removal needs to be change into other structure. And we are offering, for example, to Open Rivers program that we will put there some sequences of close to nature gravel stony prisms, but it is not accepted. So how to deal with such problem? Because in many cases, full removal of the not used obsolete dam is not right from the catchment scale looking solution.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not.
Miriam, just to let you know that we have like 2 minutes to wrap up.
Okay. I'm not an expert on that, the first of all, because I'm working with barrier removal, but I'm not engineering. I'm ecologist, so this is the first thing that I have to do. But here, at least in the Basque Country, the people, the engineers that are working on that, they construct ramps with natural stones and cobbles when they have that problem. It's not the ideal solution, obviously, but it's a solution. At the same time, sometimes we have the same problem with the lateral structure. Sometimes it's impossible to remove completely the barrier, and we have to maintain some lateral structures. Obviously, it's not the best scenario, but sometimes there are not any other possibility.
Okay.
Yeah, this is how I see the problem. But the problem is that the other side, the steering committees, etc., they are, only 0 or 1, or you remove everything, or not. So this is the problem. How to, because in Poland, keeping this way of thinking, we will be not able to remove 90% of dams, which are ready to be removed, but partially, not full.
Yeah, in that case, I suggest to ask why the objective of remove that dam. If the objective is to improve, the fish passability, obviously you can provide data about this improvement after the removal, even if it is partial of the barrier. If the objective is to decrease the flood risk, obviously you can provide that data about that. So I suggest, okay, why we are removing barriers? First to ask that, and to see, just measuring with data, if you are arriving to that objective or not. I suggest that if the objective is to improve the fish passability, the reduction of greenhouse gases, the reduction of flood risk, or these kind of things, you will achieve the objective, and so you will have it.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. Actually, it's a great question as well, and we will definitely make notes on that matters. That was also like last week we were in a workshop in Bosnia, and there were also questions and answers on this topic. So interesting to engage engineers and ecologists together in making the restoration work and also engaging. Yes. And I have just one more question that I left from George. A lot of them constructed years ago have established a new water ecosystem and biodiversity status like flora and fauna in the area. Why to take a risk to modify it again? The question.
What a lot of dams constructed years ago have established a new water ecosystem. Yeah. Okay. I think that the question, well, first, these barriers are altering the natural ecosystem and the ecosystem that is naturally there. Focus on the flora or fauna. I think that one of the objectives that, at least as ecology, I have in mind is also to protect not just the cultural heritage of the areas, also the natural heritage of the areas. And I think that to maintain this natural heritage, we have to restore ecosystems. But obviously, and as I mentioned before, the protection of the biodiversity is just one of the arguments. But there are many other arguments, as there's improvement of the self-purification capacity of the ecosystem. That is another area that we are starting to explore regarding barrier removal, the greenhouse gas emissions, the flood risks that we are also improving. So it's not just about flora or fauna, it's also about restore the ecosystem to improve the resilience of that ecosystem, because we are losing everything under climate change. So we have to maybe, to improve the ecosystems. I don't know how to say, but we are not talking just about fish or fauna. We are talking about a lot of things.
Okay, thank you so much. I would like to close this masterclass and thank you, Miriam, so much for your insights and experiences. And you will receive the recording as well. You can share with your colleagues, and you can also ask your questions and maybe have more insights from Miriam as we have the connection now together. Thank you very much, Miriam.
Thanks.
And goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.